So you bought yourself a B8 Audi A4. Awesome. But it's not turning out to be the performance car that you hoped it would be, because, well, it's not a performance car. But I'm here to show you how to fix that. This is a guide on how to make 500 horsepower to the crank, or about 420 wheel horsepower out of your B8 Audi A4. If you're new to the channel, I'm Chris, and this is my A4 that I've spent about the last 3 years building and testing, and documented the whole process on my channel, which you can watch. But watch this one first. Now, first off, let's get this out of the way. If you're looking for the most horsepower you can get for the least amount of money, this isn't the right car for that. Get something else. Second, if you want a car that's really fun out of the box, is easy to mod, has better resale value, and is overall more reliable, but looks exactly like this car, get a B8 S4. It's a better car. But if you're dumb and stubborn and get way too attached to your vehicles like me, and you prefer turbos to superchargers and you want to be just a little bit out of the ordinary, then keep following along. There are a few routes you can take to get significantly more power out of the A4. One of the most common and best bang for buck upgrades you can do is a KO4 upgrade with a tune and a downpipe. With that, you'll get around the 300 wheel horsepower range, and it's going to be way more fun to drive, and the boost is going to hold way longer than the rev range. But that's kind of where that power increase ends. Let's say you've considered the KO4, or maybe you already have a KO4 in your car, and you're kind of unimpressed and getting bored. Well, this is where the fun begins. But seriously, if you're on a budget, that's fine, just don't go this route. The costs add up like crazy. You've got the turbo itself, which can be $3,000 or more. You got engine building parts, which everyone knows are not cheap. You got fueling upgrades, intercooler, mounts, drivetrain upgrades, tuning, labor if you're not going to do everything yourself, OEM replacement parts. You've got gas from break-in miles, which it's a lot of gas. Oil changes, so many oil changes. And that's if everything goes right the first time. Ask me how I know. So, if I haven't scared you yet, let's get into it. Alright, big turbos. It's a big subject. And there are a few options for big turbos for our cars. But first you kind of have to consider, what do you want out of the car? Do you want something with a really good mid-range and high-end power band? Do you want something that is really fun in the back roads and good for track days and just fun all around, makes all the fun noises? Then you want something like the 2867R, like my car has. Or is the highest horsepower number your biggest concern? Do you want to make the most possible power you can make on this engine? Then you want something like a 3071 or larger. There are direct bolt-on kits for our cars that require almost no fabrication, like I have the Boss kit, the CTS bolt-on speed solution. Or if you have fabrication skills, the world is your oyster. Pick whatever the hell turbo you want and make the craziest exhaust manifold you can and go wild. But the bolt-on kits are obviously the easier route. They don't require an external wastegate, and they allow you to use your stock or upgraded diverter valve. So overall, it's a great solution. There's the Boss 500, which indicates that you can make 500 crank horsepower with it, or the Boss 600, which 600 horsepower. You have a lot of options. It's up to you to decide. All right, so let's say you picked which turbo you want for your car. Great. So you just got to install it on the car and drive it, right? No, you knew that was coming. In order to get the most out of this turbo setup and to keep your connecting rods inside of the engine block, you're gonna need fueling upgrades, and you're gonna need to build your engine. And engine building is a whole can of worms on its own, so I'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk fueling first. Fueling was one of the biggest limitations to getting my car to the level that it's at today, of 427 wheel horsepower. Luckily, fueling upgrades are relatively simple for this car. As far as hardware is concerned, you'll need a high pressure fuel pump upgrade. I recommend 034 because theirs works. and fuel injectors. Very common upgrade for these cars running big turbos are Mark 7R or S3 injectors. With that combination, you'll be able to run an ethanol blend and really get almost as much as you can out of something like the Boss 500. But a full E85 and really high horsepower in your plans, then you're going to need aftermarket injectors like Mavotec or Nostrum. And of course, it should go without saying that adding these kind of fueling upgrades to a car requires custom tuning to make them work properly. You can't just throw new injectors at a car and expect it to go faster. There are not too many custom tuners out there for our car, but the best, hands down, for the V8 platform is Ward Performance Tuning. Tyler Ward will get your car running as best as it possibly can and making the most power it safely can utilizing HP tuners. All you have to do is message his Facebook page and go over kind of your plans, and he'll get you pricing info, and there you go. There are a few other options out there. I've worked with United Motorsport in the past, so that is an option, so you can contact them as well. And there are additional supporting mods that you're going to want to get for a setup like this. For instance, you're going to need a bigger intercooler. I run the integrated engineering front mount intercooler. It's huge. It works great, it keeps my temperatures down, and it looks awesome. But it is kind of expensive. The best bang for buck you can get for a front mount for these cars is Rev 9. The only problem is it only comes in black, and I'm all about how the car looks and scene points, so I went for the IE one. But both are great. I also had the ECS one, and that did nothing to prevent heat soak, so stay away from that one. You'll need one of the bigger ones to counteract the higher temperatures that go along with the bigger turbo. You also have the option of going with an aftermarket intake manifold. There are a few manufacturers out there that make aluminum intake manifolds that allow for better airflow and port injection. So if port injection is in your future, it's definitely worth the upgrade. However, a lot of people have been saying recently that the stock intake manifold is actually pretty sufficient with a big turbo setup like this, so it may not be worth the extra money for that small amount of extra airflow if you're not planning on doing port injection. I have the IE intake manifold because I plan to do port meth injection in the future, but also when I started this build, I was under the impression that the stock intake manifold just couldn't handle that kind of airflow. So it's kind of up to you to decide if you want to go with something like that. Definitely talk with your tuner about it. If you have a manual car, you're definitely going to need a new clutch, something rated for 400 foot-pounds of torque or higher. Obviously, the higher the better. You have options from South Bend, Ringer Racing. I think Spec makes a clutch for our car, so it's up to you to decide. I have a South Bend Stage 2 Endurance clutch. It's held up fine, but I'm kind of right at that limit. You're also going to need aftermarket engine mounts. The added torque from a turbo setup like this, and honestly the added torque from like a Stage 1 off-the-shelf tune, is almost too much for the stock mounts, so it definitely warrants needing aftermarket engine mounts. 034 is a great option for aftermarket mounts. Now, are you starting to see how the costs add up, and we haven't even gotten into the engine building part? It's a lot, but I said engine building, so let's get into it. With a turbo setup like the 2867R or larger, you're reaching the 400 wheel torque mark, which is starting to play with fire. And on an engine that doesn't have a great track record with reliability and oiling, you gotta consider building your engine. I tried to go stock block, and we all know how that ended up. So, you do you, I'd recommend building your engine. So you decide to build your engine, but what should you go with? Well, if your engine cylinder walls are in decent shape, you can go with a standard bore forged piston accompanied by a forged connecting rod. You have multiple options for forged pistons. I run JE pistons and would definitely recommend them. IE also sells Moly pistons in standard bore and 1/2 mil over bore, which a lot of people use and are happy with. You'll also want to pair that with a set of forged connecting rods. Again, there are multiple options because our engines are shared with a lot of other VW and Audi cars, which is great. But probably the most often used connecting rod on our cars is IE. They've been tried and true, and I would stand by that. There are other options that are cheaper. There are some that are more expensive, but it's up to you to decide what you want to get. You just got to make sure that all the specifications match up with wrist pin size and all that. IE also offers I-beam Tuscan rods, but that's if you want like 700 horsepower higher. Go with the H-beam. It's more than enough. I'd recommend getting rifle drilled because then you get a little extra oiling in there. And you're probably asking, where do I get all this stuff? Go to IE's website, performancebyie.com, and filter by your car, and then go to engine build parts, and that's probably the most user-friendly interface you can find to get all of your aftermarket engine build stuff. You'll find the pistons there, you'll find the rods there, you'll find other things I'd recommend like valves and springs for your head, because that'll offer higher RPM and will prevent valve float. You'll also find things like rod bearings, which you definitely need to replace, head studs, main studs, because why not? And you'll also need to replace a lot of OEM components like single-use bolts, timing chains, guides, that kind of stuff. Your head gasket, obviously. So you may need to get that from FCP or ECS or from the dealer. And you'll want to replace your main bearings. Those are an important thing that you need to look into because every single engine block in the 2.0 is different for which main bearings it has. It's color-coded, so look into that before you get main bearings. So there is a lot to consider with building your engine and a lot of decisions that you need to make that require a lot of homework on your end. The biggest thing to consider is who is doing all this work. Do you have experience building engines? Are you willing to risk all of that money just to save some money by doing it yourself or to get the experience? I tried to do that. I tried to build the bottom end myself because I wanted the experience of doing that. I wanted to try the new things and save a little money by not taking it to the machine shop. It worked great until it didn't. And then me and the mad scientist had to rip apart the block and replace the piston rings I just fried. So then I had to take it to the machine shop and have them fix it again with new pistons and rings. And basically, if I would have done that in the first place, I would have saved a lot more money. So it's not cheap. Taking your stuff to the machine shop is not cheap at all. When I got the head done initially, that was about $800. And then when I got the bottom end done, that was about $1,000. So it's a lot more money, but it might take a few more months of saving, but it's definitely worth the peace of mind knowing a professional has put your engine together. And plus, you're supporting your local automotive industry, which is really important these days. So if I had one recommendation in this whole video is if you're not comfortable doing it yourself, take it to a professional. All right, that was a lot of info. Let's do a quick review. So, in order to make 500 crank horsepower out of your V8A4, you're gonna want a big turbo, obviously. You can get a bolt-on kit like the Boss 500 or the Boss 600. You can go bigger power with a bigger turbo. You're gonna want a built engine. You're gonna want fueling upgrades like high pressure fuel pump upgrade and bigger injectors. You're gonna need things like a bigger intercooler, better mounts, an aftermarket intake manifold, an aftermarket clutch if you've got a manual. And you're gonna need to replace a lot of OEM parts that are single use on the engine like your bearings. And of course, you're gonna need to tune the car. Contact Ward Performance Tuning to get your car to its best possible state. If you do all that, you're gonna have one hell of a car. Or you can just buy a B8 S4 and throw some bolt-ons on it and you'll be at the same level. Yeah. Thanks for watching.